Welcome back to the Garden Hutch. Today we're going to discuss what we do when weather wreaks havoc on our gardens. Let's get going. Well, it's no secret that over the last few years, the weather has become much more severe, causing a lot more damage. So today I just kind of wanted to go through and let everyone know what we do here on the homestead whenever the weather wreaks havoc on our food security plans. So this year we have had 4 major weather events where the power has gone out, sometimes for multiple days at a time, and then after that you're followed by triple-digit heat, that sort of thing. And when it comes to food security, having winds that are over 75 to 80 miles an hour can be devastating. And we recently had one of those, and I had to go through and sort of redo a lot of our beds and that sort of thing. So I thought it would be fun to bring you all along and kind of go through my thought process and what we do to sort of plug in our food security when some of our beds get destroyed. So the vast majority of all of the weather damage we've had so far this year has been here in the top garden. I wanted to start with this because these squash plants are doing so well tying them up on these poles. It's the first year we ever tried it. We're getting a lot more squash, and our zucchini and yellow squash have made it way longer this year than they usually do. We usually start getting fruit in May, and then by the end of June they're either completely saturated in squash bugs, or we've got vine borers or something along those lines. But knock on wood, it looks like most of them are going to make it well into July. So why am I showing you this? Well, if we get down here, this plant here was cracked at the bottom, and you can kind of see the leaves here are kind of starting to discolor a little bit. 3-4 days ago, something along those lines, we had winds that came through at over 80 miles an hour, and it did a number on these guys. So it cracked it at the bottom there, but it hasn't died off. So I'm wondering if maybe that vine can repair itself. So in a situation like this, what do? Well, for us here on the homestead, because this is only a container garden, I'm gonna let this go and just kind of see what happens. If this was in one of our other beds, the dilemma would be a lot more whether or not we should pull it or not. And speaking of, if we look directly over here next to the squash, you can see all of this area through here. We only have 2 of our dinosaur kale plants, and if you look down here, you can see this one is severely bent over. Now, when those winds came through, they devastated our kale as well. In fact, we had 4 kale that were either broken off at the bottom or the roots had come out and I had to remove them. And it also caught the chard. If you'll remember, we had large chard that were right next to this guy, and it broke all of them off and pulled them up as well. So in this case, because this bed was sort of overplanted anyway and was like a last minute decision, we're not going to really do anything. In fact, the wind coming through this bed might actually help us out and create an environment where the kale can grow a little bit bigger, and then the neighbor plants may have access to a bit more sun as the summer goes along. Personally, this bed is the most devastating for us. We had corn, the silk had come off on it. Now, we did have a couple animals come through and start chewing on it, and we were hoping that we could resolve that issue, but Mother Nature took that out of our hands when the winds came through and literally ripped most of the corn out from the ground. In fact, they had fallen, most of them, on our ground cherries, and we had to come through and pull them out. Luckily, there was no major damage to the ground cherries. Real quick, I also wanted to just touch on the yellow squash bed here. Most of this survived okay. It got beat up pretty good, and we haven't really had a lot more of the female flowers set, and I think it's because of the trauma. It looks like it's going to recover, all except for the 4th one over here. That one took the brunt of the wind, I think. That's probably why the rest of them survived as well as they did. But we came out, and 2 days later it was wilted and just completely dead. I looked through to find out if there were any bugs or anything, and when I looked at the bottom, it had ripped the squash apart from the stem right where the original tie was at. So I guess that 80-mile-an-hour wind was just too much, and it just ripped that thing right off. Well, as you can see, that is a lot of food to remove from your food security plan. So how do you recover from that? Well, here on the homestead, we have 4 vegetables that we go to this time of year if anything like this happens. They are green beans, purple whole peas, okra, and cucumbers. Now, depending on what it is that we lost depends on what we're going to plant more of in those spaces in order to kind of patch up our food security. So let's go take a look at what we've done. One of the big things we're going to use to plug in for the loss of our squash, which would be some of our summer food, are going to be these beans. Now, we had already planted these because we had the extra space from the removal of our carrots. We'd never planned on growing them this year, but we thought, what the heck, you know, we'll go ahead and try it. And having that foresight is going to pay off big time for us as we move into July. Because like I said, we lost 2 zucchini and 1 yellow squash, and the production off of that is immense, especially in the summertime. We were planning on eating those for some of our fresh vegetables to complement the cucumbers and tomatoes, but instead these green beans will make a perfect substitute for the next month and a half to help get us through so that we don't have to tap into the resources we're planning on saving for the winter. So now let's talk about this corn bed up here. The reality is we had planned on the corn on freezing most of it and enjoying it in the wintertime. So we took the initiative now of taking this out. I re-prepped the soil, we put in an all-purpose fertilizer, and I have planted okra. Now, okra loves the heat. So this upcoming week, it's going to be over 100 degrees almost all week. Heading into July here in 7B, it's commonplace for it to get 100 degrees. So one of the reasons why we like okra in this situation is it loves the heat. It thrives when the temperatures get hot. So even though, as you can see, the rest of the garden is matured to the point where it's already putting off its fruit, as the heat hits, it'll allow this okra bed to catch up to everything around it and start producing. Not only that, but okra puts off so much fruit that we'll pickle a lot of it and freeze a lot of it, and hopefully that can plug in the majority of what we're going to lose from our winter food security plan from the loss of this corn bed. Just a few things to wrap up here at the end. Like I had mentioned, the other 2 vegetables that we haven't planted that we will use this time of year are cucumbers and the purple whole peas. Now, cucumbers we'll use if we have an area that we have lost that has a trellis already built. So let's say, for example, that we had lost all of our cherry tomatoes or something along those lines, and the trellises were still intact. Cucumbers are a great way to substitute for that, especially on cherry tomatoes, because the cucumbers will grow if you take care of them right up until the first freeze. So you can substitute some of those snacks you would use the cherry tomatoes for the cucumbers. And another thing I'd like to point out, if we would have had a major loss of our squash, so the stuff we lost, I don't really have the room to replant anything, but if those beds would have been a total loss, I would have gone through and used the purple whole peas in those instances. The reason for that is fresh purple whole peas are absolutely wonderful, and you can use them in many different ways throughout the course of a summer, or even save them for the winter time. So in a squash bed, if you put those purple whole peas in there, in one of these, last year we were picking 5-gallon buckets 2 or 3 times on each round. So that's just something to consider depending on your situation and what you're trying to substitute in your food security plan. As always, I appreciate you all for hanging out with me today. Till next time, I hope you all take care of yourselves. Peace.